goodbye to the crown. Goodbye to the dear old mum, mummified on gin and rum. Smile and wave and just play dumb. Goodbye to the crown. Farewell the jewel crown, farewell the velvet gown. Watch it all come tumbling down. Goodbye to the crown. Goodbye to the crown.
Hello there. You're watching Press TV's The Monarchy with me, Samson Sees. This is the programme that reveals alternative stories about the not-so-okay UK. These are the very issues that are not being addressed on mainstream media networks. Check this out. Most of you are aware that the referendum on Scottish independence that took place last month was very close. But what if someone was to suggest that this epic vote might have been rigged? Could that be likely? This is the super-duper democracy in the UK we're talking about here. Speaking of democracy, it looks like there's a plan by London officials to crack down on free speech. Well, enough speech from this end. Time to find out more. Sometimes you have to lose a battle or two before eventually winning the fight. London may have won the Scottish referendum battle on paper, but the general mood among Scots show that the fight is far from over.
Over 100,000 people have signed petitions demanding a recount or a new vote of the Scottish independence referendum after videos have emerged allegedly showing evidence of vote fraud. The signatory of petition at the change.org petition demand a revote of the Scottish referendum in which each vote shall be counted by two individuals, one of whom should be an international impartial party without a stake in the vote. According to Kirsty Keatings, who created the change.org petition, there have been countless evidences of fraud documented during the independence poll. The petitions were launched after several video clips went viral on the internet, showing examples of potential vote fraud during the Scottish referendum. Among the clips, one woman appears to place a bundle of yes votes onto the no pile. Another video footage shows piles of yes votes lying on a table designated for no votes. In addition, election observers from a Russian monitoring agency slammed the referendum procedure as fraudulent. Georgy Fyodorov, head of the Association for the Protection of Electoral Rights, reported that there were more yes votes during the vote count. Fyodorov also argued that the no campaign resorted to every violation imaginable. Russian polling expert Igor Borisov also stated that the voting procedure was last century, adding it was impossible to see what was going on at polling tables, and that the ballot boxes were lying around without any protection. It has been confirmed that the names of 10 people were already crossed off a voter list prior to them voting inside a polling station. There were other anomalies, illustrating the hypocrisy of the recent referendum vote. The turnout in the strong yes area of Glasgow was 75%, which is lower than the 85% turnout in Scotland as a whole.
A 9/11 activist in London has handed himself into Britain's counter-terrorism police following the speech given by UK Prime Minister David Cameron to the United Nations Security Council. You too, if you question the government's narrative about terror attacks like the one that occurred on September the 11th, or believe in religious prophecies about the end of times, or dispute the legitimacy of your rulers, or hold any sort of views that politicians consider extremist, watch out.
Order. The question is the motion on Iraq, coalition against ISIL, as on the order paper. As many as are that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. Aye. Division. Clear the lobby. Order. Order.
The ayes to the right, 524. The noes to the left, 43.
On the eve of the British Parliament being recalled to debate more extensive military deployments in the Middle East, Prime Minister David Cameron made a speech before the United Nations General Assembly. It would be no overstatement to describe his speech as ominous, although one had to read between the lines to find the sinister subtext. Nonetheless, there was a powerful underlying message with ominous overtones.
To defeat ISIL and organisations like it, we must defeat this ideology in all its forms. As evidence emerges about the backgrounds of those convicted of terrorist offences, it is clear that many of them were initially influenced by preachers who claim not to encourage violence, but whose worldview can be used as a justification for it. We know this worldview, the peddling of lies, that 9/11 was somehow a Jewish plot, or that the 7/7 London attacks were staged. The idea that Muslims are persecuted all over the world as a deliberate act of Western policy. The concept of an inevitable clash of civilizations. We must be clear, to defeat the ideology of extremism, we need to deal with all forms of extremism, not just violent extremism. For governments, there are some obvious ways we can do this. We must ban preachers of hate from coming to our countries. We must prescribe organizations that incite terrorism against people at home and abroad. We must work together to take down illegal online material like the recent videos of ISIL murdering hostages. And we must stop the so-called non-violent extremists from inciting hatred and intolerance in our schools, our universities, and yes, even our prisons. Of course, some will argue that this is not compatible with free speech and intellectual inquiry. But I ask you, would we sit back and allow right-wing extremists, Nazis or Ku Klux Klansmen to recruit on our university campuses? No. So we shouldn't stand by and just allow any form of non-violent extremism. We need to argue that prophecies of a global war of religion, pitting Muslims against the rest of the world, these things are nonsense.
In essence, Cameron is saying that to suggest that anything other than the official version of events for 9/11 or 7/7 is tantamount to promoting terrorism. He is also calling, in effect, for a clampdown on the free exchange of ideas and information that doesn't accord with the official narrative. Cameron is essentially calling for a clampdown on ideas and information that run counter to the fraudulent war on terror, for which he has campaigned so vigorously. He's saying, in effect, that anyone who exposes the lies behind this war is on a par with terrorists. They say knowledge is power, and the exchange of knowledge and ideas is part of that process. That's why Cameron is proposing to impose restrictions on the free flow of information and ideas. Even though those involved in the transaction may not encourage violence, the perspectives they are sharing pose a direct challenge to those whom David Cameron really works for. Authorities are also plotting an intense crackdown on speech and ideas, with official plans that have been widely criticised and ridiculed by opponents as extreme, counterproductive and repressive. For the fortunate, non-violent extremists, authorities are planning to impose a censorship regime, further curtailing free speech in addition to close monitoring, under an upcoming set of new rules to be inflicted on British subjects by Cameron's self-styled Conservative Party. People considered to be extremists will have to seek approval from terror police simply to post messages on Facebook or Twitter. According to The Telegraph, the so-called extremist disruption orders will also prohibit extremists from speaking at public events if authorities decide they might represent a threat to the vaguely defined functioning of democracy. Top government officials said extremists would be barred from speaking on television or radio too. If a group promotes or spreads what politicians consider hatred, its members and donors can be imprisoned for up to 10 years. The so-called banning orders, purporting to prohibit organisations and speech the government disagrees with, are reportedly part of a broader strategy dubbed Prevent. The goal of the scheme, its proponents say, is to defeat ideologies and non-violent extremism that politicians claim can, possibly, somehow, maybe, foment a terror threat. The controversial scheming, which has been blasted even by some members of the Conservative Party, was outlined by British Home Secretary Theresa May.
But we must continue to do more. Soon we will make Prevent a statutory duty for all public sector organisations. I want to see new banning orders for extremist groups that fall short of the existing laws relating to terrorism. I want to see new civil powers to target extremists who stay just within the law but still spread poisonous hatred. So both policies, banning orders and extremism disruption orders, will be in the next Conservative manifesto. And our policy doesn't just focus on violent extremism, it deals with non-violent extremism too. Since 2010, I have prevented more foreign hate preachers coming to Britain than any Home Secretary before me. And despite the European Court of Human Rights, I've kicked a few of them out of the country too. For people we cannot prosecute, but for whom there is evidence of their involvement in terrorism, we have some of the strongest laws in the world. The police and security service can already apply to me to put these people on terrorism prevention and investigation measures, or TPIMs. These require subjects to be at a particular address for a number of hours every night, limit their access to the internet and telephones, and prevent them meeting named associates. We believe we need to strengthen these powers, so I am determined to do exactly that. We're toughening up the charity rules and the powers of the Charity Commission, working with Ofcom to deal with extremist broadcasts, improving the inspection regime and strengthening the rules for schools. We're working with the Ministry of Justice to tackle radicalisation in prisons, demanding more from universities to prevent radicalisation on campus, and improving our ability to take down terrorist material from the internet. And I want to tell you about another change we intend to make. As part of the government's counter-terrorism strategy, Prevent has only ever focused on the hard end of the extremism spectrum. So the Home Office will soon, for the first time, assume responsibility for a new counter-extremism strategy that goes beyond terrorism. The strategy will be overseen and devised by the Home Office, but its implementation will be the responsibility of the whole of government, the rest of the public sector and civil society. It will aim to undermine and eliminate extremism in all its forms.
The British government's deeply controversial efforts to suppress free speech and free thought, however, will not be limited to Her Majesty's increasingly Orwellian government. New official guidelines impose strict controls on anyone from the armed forces making contact with journalists, even in a social setting. The rules state that when a member of the armed forces has any contact with a journalist, they must immediately notify press officers. This applies even if a member of armed forces staff meets a journalist socially or through their family. The rules don't just apply to journalists. They also apply if a soldier should accidentally come into contact with any individuals who are known to have close links with the media, such as academics, representatives of industry, and think tanks. Where unplanned contact is made between a member of the armed forces and a journalist, they are instructed to immediately notify media staff and provide a written account of the contact. The document also states, these rules still apply if individuals encounter journalists or other members of the news media in a social setting, whether work-related or not. Third-party individuals with known links to the media, such as commentators, academics, representatives of industry, think tanks or lobby groups, or former serving personnel with a media profile. The rules also state that any member of the armed forces wishing to communicate on social media on a non-contentious defence issue must apply for authorisation to do so. Failure to comply with the new rules will lead to disciplinary action. The new guidelines came into force in September amid revelations that the police have secretly used the regulation of investigatory powers to obtain details of journalists' phone records in order to find their sources.
The true facts and evidence about the so-called war on terror are now coming forward, and there is a tidal wave of growing awareness as people are now getting to see this information. They cannot be covered up by any crude efforts by the UK government to censor the internet or to give these people an extremist label. It is far too late for that.
What are you doing here today?
Oh, I'm here to hand myself in.
For what?
David Cameron's new definition of non-violent extremism, which made the UN on the 25th of September, reinforced today by Theresa May, talking about these non-violent extremists in our midst, and it specifically alludes to anyone in the 9/11 Truth movement who believes that the London bombings were set up with publicity of their government, and I think the time has come for 9/11 Truth activists to go and hand themselves in and demand that they be arrested. Well, I just wanted to the new definition of non-violent extremism that David Cameron has given, and I just sent this letter to Scotland Yard. Perhaps you've received it.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, fine. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, very appreciative. Yeah. And would you allow me to give myself up, or I feel I'm the new terror threat? You won't accept me? No. You won't? Oh, shucks. Don't you feel that's what the Prime Minister has mandated you to do in his new...
I'm not looking to make a statement. I'm just saying that they have a policy here that they don't accept. Right. Theresa May, apparently today, she made a speech about non-violent extremists that we have to sort of do something about. Is your police department in any way obliged to sort of take action? I'm not like to say anything at all. All I'm saying is that they're not acceptable.
Well, I feel the Prime Minister is clearly pointing at me with this what she thinks is a terrible new threat. So, as a law-abiding citizen, I feel obliged to come and give myself up.
I think you're talking to the wrong person. They won't accept your books.
No, well, don't understand my body. That's fine.
So long as you understand.
Can I still give myself up?
Give yourself up.
Well, can you tell me? Well, I feel you should arrest me as a terror threat.
No,
Yeah, sir.
Have I come to the wrong place?
Sorry?
Have I come to the wrong place?
What place do you think this is?
Well, here's the New Scotland Yard, and I think you deal with terror threats here to the nation. That's why I came here. That's why I sent the letter.
Well, I'm not allowed to discuss it anymore. All I'm here to say is that we're not accepting anything.
No, right.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay.
You do?
Okay. Yeah. Well, he had clearly got my letter. He'd received my letter. He'd got a copy of it with him, which I was quite impressed by, actually. So that shows they had taken notice of my letter, and he just said that he wasn't prepared to do anything. That's all he said. Yeah.
What are you going to do next then?
Well, I might try and give myself up. You said it's Charing Cross or something?
Down the street or Charing Cross?
But it was a gesture. I think that they've got the message. That's the important thing. Yeah. Okay.
Wow, there's a lot there to discuss, so get online with us. You can write to us via our Facebook page, UK Desk Press TV, or if you prefer, you can email britain@presstv.ir. You've been watching The Monarchy, and The Monarchy has been watching Britain. We'll be back next week with more controversies from the UK. Until then, it's goodbye.
Someone. My lord, your time has come right between the eyes. Felled his master not by chance, away with pomp and circumstance. Come join our merry dance to the rhythm of goodbye. Farewell the jewel crown, farewell the velvet gown. Watch it all come tumbling down. Goodbye to the crown. Goodbye to the crown. Goodbye to the king of nothing really. Wave of a hand and a life of Riley. Pot Nazi, pot King Billy. Goodbye to the crown. Goodbye to the dear old mum, mummified on gin and rum. Smile and wave and just play dumb. Goodbye to the crown.